how does identity, really shift and redefine itself under immense pressure, especially during periods of just profound change, like colonial rule colliding with national liberation movements?
It's a huge question, and it goes way beyond just political boundaries, right? It's about the soul of a people, how they see themselves.
Yeah, and what happens when that core sense of self is challenged from all sides.
Exactly.
So today we're embarking on a deep dive into this really complex, often turbulent history of Muslim thought and politics in South Asia. We're looking at roughly 1850, right through the partition of India.
And our mission really is to unpack how the Muslim individual and the community were profoundly reconfigured by colonial rule, the rise of nationalism, and also those deep-seated internal differences that sometimes get glossed over.
Absolutely. And we'll be drawing our insights from Ayesha Jalal's seminal work, Self and Sovereignty, Individual and Community in South Asian Islam since 1850.
Right. Jalal is a MacArthur Fellow, professor of history at Tufts, and her analysis is just incredibly detailed. It's going to be our guide through these intricate historical currents.
Okay, let's dive in now. Before the full force of colonial rule really took hold, say, pre-1857, what was the understanding of the individual and community for Muslims in South Asia? What did identity even look like?
Well, what's fascinating here, and Jalal really emphasizes this, is how different their understanding of self was from, say, modern Western individualism. Identity wasn't just personal.
It was collective.
Fundamentally collective, yeah. Deeply interwoven with the spiritual fabric of the community. Take the concept of the Miraj Sharif, the Holy Prophet's ascension to God. The core idea isn't just about his personal journey. It's his choice to return to his ummat, his community, rather than stay in direct communion with God.
So that choice itself becomes a foundational principle.
Exactly. It underscores this profound link, this idea that individual fate was just inextricably tied to the collective destiny.
That makes sense. A collective spiritual destiny, not just, individual salvation on its own. And it sounds like Sufi mystics were pretty central in making this relatable.
Oh, absolutely crucial, especially during the Delhi Sultanate, that long period from about 1206 to 1526. Sufis were really instrumental in accommodating Islam to the very diverse regional context in India.
How did he do that?
Well, through a kind of blending, even with popular Hindu bhakti practices. This spurred a slow, steady process of conversion, but also produced this rich body of poetry in local languages.
Which made Islamic beliefs more accessible, I imagine.
Much more accessible, yes, and integrated into everyday life.
And it's in that context, the source highlights the significance of Sufi shrines, the maqbaras, as distinct sites.
Yes, precisely. They're distinct from mosques, which are primarily for collective worship. These tombs, the maqbaras, they served as focal points for individual devotion. Yeah. And what's really key is how they often cut across communitarian divides. People from different backgrounds would visit. These tombs, often octagonal, symbolizing paradise on earth, highlighted what Jalal calls the organic unity of being.
Seamlessly blending spiritual and secular realms.
Exactly. It shows a deeply interwoven identity where the sacred was just part of daily individual life, and it wasn't always about rigid lines between groups.
Okay, so fast forward a bit. 1857, the revolt. It feels like a watershed moment. How did that experience, the experience of foreign rule and that very real loss of traditional Muslim sovereignty, how did that start to reshape identity? It must have been a profound shock.
It was, and Jalal's analysis highlights a really nuanced response to that loss. It wasn't just an abstract political fact, it became a lived experience, a disruption.
Right.
Consider Mirza Asadullah Khan Khalib, the great poet. He witnessed 1857 firsthand, and his anguish, Jalal points out, was less about foreign rule itself.
Well, what was it then?
It was more about the loss of an established way of life. He had this powerful poetic image comparing sovereignty to a cup of wine which constantly changed hands.
Meaning it was always temporary, shifting.
Exactly, ephemeral, not like, the legendary permanent chalice of the Persian king Jamshid. So the real pain wasn't just who was in power, but the disruption of a familiar, valued social order.
So a feeling of a world unraveling, more than just a regime change.
Precisely. And even the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, reportedly called himself a fakir, a beggar. He apparently, sovereignty had been lost 100 years before 1857.
Wow. So a deep awareness of his own diminished power. A long decline, not a sudden fall.
A long erosion, yes. Which makes the 1857 reaction even more complex.
And the reasons people joined the rebellion, It wasn't purely religious, was it? The source suggests more to it.
You're right. While Islamic sensibilities definitely motivated some Muslims, Jalal notes that religion alone doesn't explain everything. Many were driven by very material concerns.
Like what?
Like the large-scale confiscation of Jogir's land grants by the East India Company. This hit people hard, eroding their social status, their economic stability.
So it was a mix. Faith, livelihood, maybe a desire to restore some kind of order.
A complex blend, absolutely, which fueled the rebellion in diverse ways.
So with traditional authority figures weakened, the old ways disrupted. People weren't just reacting passively, were they? They were actively trying to, well, redefine themselves, assert their identities somehow.
That's a crucial point. They were actively rebuilding and reasserting. And this is where new media, like the press and poetry, become really critical tools.
Oh, so?
Well, the late 19th century saw this explosion of print. Both Muslim and Hindu groups, or communities as they were starting to be called, used newspapers and publications to reach their own people, but also to get the attention of the colonial state.
And poetry, you mentioned Ghalib.
Poetry remained incredibly powerful, Urdu poetry especially. Think of Altaf Hussain Hali's huge work, the Musadasi-Hali from 1879. It played a massive role in proclaiming a distinctive Muslim cultural identity. But it was also a stinging critique. Hali described Indian Muslims as having lost sovereignty, wealth, intellect, and self-respect, basically existing by virtue of their religion alone.
That's harsh. That also sounds like a call to action.
It was. Yet, interestingly, in another poem, Shikwai-Hind, a complaint to India, Hali urged against severing ties with India. He had this powerful line, "We were fire, O Hind, you've turned us into ash."
Wow. That captures such a complex feeling, loss, decline, but still a deep connection to the land.
Exactly. A poignant sense of loss, but an enduring bond.
The source also mentioned Punjabi Sufi poetry having a different kind of emphasis.
Yeah.
More individual.
Yes. Particularly the work of Baba Bulleh Shah. It really stands out for asserting individual autonomy in worship, sometimes even defying established religious authority.
How so?
Well, his famous line, something like, "Bulleh, how do I know who I am?" He knew of no religion and was neither Muslim nor Hindu. It illustrates this radical subjectivity, you know?
A personal connection to the divine that maybe transcends labels.
That's the feeling, yes. An emphasis on inner truth over external divisions.
And language itself. Urdu, for instance, became a marker of this complex identity, too.
Absolutely. Sayyid Ahmad Khan made this observation. He said that after centuries of interaction, Hindus and Muslims had mixed so much that the blood of both have changed. The color of both have become similar.
Leading to a shared language.
Yes, leading to Urdu, which he described as neither our language nor theirs, a powerful symbol of shared heritage, a blended cultural reality.
And this wasn't just in the north.
No, in Bengal too, Muslim literature, there was this fascinating blend, Sanskrit-derived script, Hindu Vaishnavite idioms, all interlaced with Persian and Arabic words. And the autonomous Muslim kingdoms there actually patronized Bengali literature.
Really?
Yeah, fostering a situation where Bengali Muslims could comfortably relate to their Islamic identity within what was clearly a Hindu-influenced tradition. It shows how porous those cultural boundaries could actually be.
That's a fascinating interplay of culture. But then you have the colonial state stepping in, trying to impose its own categories, its legal definitions. How did that impact things?
Right, and this is where things get really complicated. The British had this pendency, this need to codify and enumerate everything. And this significantly shaped how communities were perceived and defined, often with unsettling consequences.
Like with law.
Exactly. So the British compiled both Muslim and Hindu law. But in practice, especially in places like Punjab and the northwestern frontier, local customary or tribal law often trumped traditional Islamic Sharia in things like property, marriage, divorce.
So creating confusion about what Muslim law even was in practice.
Precisely. It introduced new layers of legal complexity.
And what about the qazis, the traditional Islamic judges? Their roles seemed to become a flashpoint.
It really did. Abolishing the Mughal system of law officials, including the qazis, had these unsettling social effects, especially in cities. Groups like the National Mohammedan Association lobbied hard to get them reappointed.
But that wasn't simple either.
No, because it immediately highlighted sectarian divisions. Sunnis, Shias, Wahhabis. They often wouldn't accept a qazi from a different sect. So unity was fractured even on that level.
And
Ironically, despite all the fears about Islamic law dying out, Jalal argues it actually got its greatest boost under British colonialism. Why? Because British officials and scholars compiled and codified it, bringing it into their system.
Which, in a way, defined and preserved it, but within a colonial framework.
Exactly, a paradoxical outcome.
Beyond law, there was also this narrative emerging, wasn't there, about Muslim disloyalty?
Yes, that became quite potent. W. Hunter's book, The Indian Musulmans from 1871, was hugely influential. It talked about fanatical elements among Muslims, people supposedly susceptible to warlike enterprise.
And this narrative was picked up.
Oh, yes. It fueled negative portrayals in Hindu and Christian missionary newspapers. Some Hindu editors even started framing the British Raj as, like, liberation from tyrannical Muslim rule.
Framing Muslims as inherently disloyal.
Precisely. It shows how a political narrative was actively constructed to categorize and often demonize an entire community.
And there's another layer here, often less discussed, the women's question. How did debates around women fit into all this?
That's crucial. The discourse, particularly among the Ashraf, the Muslim elite, was deeply patriarchal. Women were often seen as silenced partners.
And their role and identity.
Depending on their class, sometimes seen as almost dispensable in constructing this larger Muslim identity. It's quite striking. And anxieties about social change under colonialism often got projected onto women.
How so?
Well, things like perceived leniency on adultery, or even new technologies like railways improving communication. These were bizarrely blamed for the increasing depravity of women in cities like Lahore and Amritsar.
Seriously?
Yes. Jalal quotes claims that scarcely a mohallas could be found in which 10% at least of the women were not of a profligate character. It just vividly shows how fears about change and outside influence were dumped onto women's morality.
That's quite something. So you had these shifting identities, these internal fractures, colonial pressures. What happens when all this collides with the really powerful forces of emerging nationalisms? This feels like a critical turning point.
It absolutely is. This period marks a phase where you see these incredibly diverse Muslim responses to nationalism and colonialism, and those responses really shape the future.
Like Muhammad Iqbal, his journey seems symbolic.
Very much so. You know, his early poetry famously celebrated India, Sar Jahan se acha Hindustan Hamara. Our India is the best in the world. Beautiful stuff.
But he changed his view.
Dramatically, yes, especially after visiting Europe. He started critiquing Western nationalism, with Tanyat calling it a recipe for European disaster. He had that striking line, "Men of the West, the country of a god is not a shop. Your civilization will commit suicide with its own dagger."
Wow, so a move away from territorial nationalism.
Towards emphasizing the Islamic concept of a universal brotherhood, ummah, and also the power of negation, the law in the Islamic creed for individual self-realization, or kuturi. He argued against these narrow Western-style national loyalties.
That's a profound shift. And speaking of nationalism, the two-nation theory inevitably comes up. How contested was that idea back then? It wasn't monolithic, was it?
No, not at all. Highly contested and evolving. Jalal points out that Sayyid Ahmad Khan, who's often linked to it, actually used the term Qawm interchangeably. Sometimes it meant the Indian nation, sometimes the Muslim community.
So not necessarily separate nations initially.
He even stated explicitly, Hindus, Muslims, and Christians who live in this country constitute one nation. But later, figures like Muhammad Ali argued things had changed. He felt patriotism in India had become exclusively Hindu or Muslim.
Accusing Hindu nationalists of ignoring Muslims.
Yes, accusing them of ignoring 70 million Muslims and basically expecting them to just assimilate, to become completely Hinduized.
Yeah.
You can see the chasm widening rapidly there.
Okay, then came the Khilafat movement.
Yeah.
That seems like it was a powerful unifying force for Muslims for a while.
It was, yeah. A really powerful expression of Muslim cultural distinctiveness, but also, paradoxically, an attempt at pan-Indian unity, just under a different an Islamic banner.
How did that work?
Leaders like Abul Kalam Azad argued that pan-Islamism, this ideal of universal brotherhood, a non-territorial nationality, wasn't foreign. It had roots in Islam itself. The movement took specific worries about the fate of the Ottoman Caliphate in Turkey.
Right, after World War I.
Exactly. And transformed those worries into a broader protest against British oppression of Muslim religious freedom in India. It connected the global to the local.
And it even led to people leaving India, the Hijrat.
It did. An estimated 60,000 Muslims left India for Afghanistan. Azad issued a fatwa declaring it an Islamic obligation to quit British India. It showed just how deeply intertwined religious conviction was with civil, political, and economic rights for many.
But that unity, powerful as it sounds, must have been fragile.
Extremely fragile. You had leaders like Dr. Saifuddin Kichli saying, we are first Indians and then Muslims, but others like Maulvi Abdullah Minhas insisting, no, first a Muslim and then Indian. Deep disagreements.
And then the Mipila revolt happened.
Yes, 1921 in Kerala. Reports of forced conversions of Hindus by Muslim peasants during that uprising caused widespread outrage among Hindus. Many felt Gandhi had, quote, blundered in giving an irresponsible band of Islamic universalists their head.
A real turning point, damaging trust.
Definitely. And around the same time, after the Congress Party was more established, the vernacular press saw this flourishing discourse of exclusionary majoritarian Hinduism.
Using derogatory terms.
Yeah, words like Yavanas, foreigners, and Malekas, impure ones for Muslims, became more common in some publications. And movements like the Arya Samaj's Shuddhi, purification, and Sangathan, unity.
Aimed at converting Muslims back to Hinduism.
And lower castes, too, yes. It aimed to bring them back into the Hindu fold, which inevitably sharpened those communal lines even further, making unity incredibly difficult.
So this all seems to be building towards the tragic outcome, partition. How did these complex dynamics, these conflicts, especially in a place like Punjab, lead to such a decisive, devastating split?
Punjab becomes absolutely central here. Jalal describes it as the arena where these pitched wars of communitarianism played out most fiercely. You even had figures like Lajpat Rai proposing schemes to partition the province itself, using religious identity to stake regional claims.
So local politics feeding into the larger national question.
Directly. And paradoxically, the very effort to define and unify a Muslim whole seemed to exacerbate the internal divisions.
How so?
It heightened internal contestations, as Jalal puts it, along class lines, sectarian differences, regional loyalties, ideological splits. For example, you had the RRs, a significant Muslim religious party.
Right.
They opposed the Muslim League's demand for Pakistan, but they proposed their own alternative.
Yeah.
Hukumat Ilahiyah, God's government, where each community would be governed by its own holy book.
So competing visions even among those wanting a Muslim future.
Exactly. Diverse competing visions. And then legal rulings added fuel to the fire. The Shahiganj Mosque case in Lahore.
What happened there?
The court basically prioritized a British law, the 1872 Punjab Laws Act, over Muslim personal law in this dispute over an old mosque site. This deeply angered many Muslims because it just highlighted the supremacy of British law over their religious identity and traditions.
And violence was escalated dramatically by this point.
It really was. Jalal points to this stark disjunction between flimsy organizational structures and offensive political rhetoric. It led directly to widespread social violence.
People taking matters into their own hands.
Yes. Reports of Hindus and Muslims stockpiling weapons, paramilitary groups getting involved, the RSS on the Hindu side, the Muslim League National Guard, MLNG on the other, implicated in arson, murder. It was terrifying.
And the Sikhs, caught in the middle.
Painfully caught between Hindu and Muslim majoritarian demands. Yes. They increasingly asserted their own distinct identity. Conversions to the Nihangs, this quasi-monastic warrior order, increased. New factories were set up just to distribute kirpans, the ceremonial daggers.
Seen as preparation for conflict.
Explicitly seen, Jalal notes, as a political move to arm non-Muslims for a potential civil war. Even Mountbatten apparently described the Sikhs as being most businesslike and serious in their preparations. They saw what was coming.
Amidst all this militarization, the Muslim League was also broadening its political appeal in other ways. You mentioned women earlier.
Yes, this is interesting. Jinnah's Muslim League, needing a broad base for the Pakistan demand, actively supported women's rights, including the right to vote.
Pragmatic politics.
It seems so. Urban Muslim women were encouraged to join the League's National Guard. There were meetings where they asserted their intention to seek emancipation on the line adopted in modern Turkey. It was about mobilization.
And then the 1946 elections. They sound like they became almost a referendum on Pakistan itself, heavily using religious language.
Absolutely. The Muslim League became incredibly effective at appropriating Islamic idioms. Jalal cites examples where audiences were warned they'd become kafirs, non-believers, if they didn't vote for the League.
Wow.
And slogans like, Islam in danger, or what is the meaning of Pakistan, la ilaha illallah, there is no God but God, were everywhere. It basically transformed the election into a kind of crusade for Pakistan.
Blurring religious and political duty.
Completely. This led to this unprecedented demand for Maulvis, religious scholars, and peers, spiritual guides, to campaign for the League. Faith became central to the political argument.
So it all comes together. The political lines drawn, the violence, the rhetoric, the outcome, partition, seems almost inevitable looking back. But the human experience must have been shattering. What does Jalal say about that, the actual lived reality?
Right, and that's what really hits home in her analysis, the profound personal anguish that often gets lost in the grand narratives of state formation.
How is that captured?
Well, through poetry, for instance. Tuluk Chand Maroom, a Punjabi Hindu poet who wrote in Urdu, lamented the destruction of that shared regional culture, saying, "Alas, Punjab, pity on you and your culture." Just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Or Sardar Jaffrey's poem Kunki Lakir, The Line of Blood, he denounced the new border as an imperialist artifact, one that cut a deep line of innocent blood across the motherland's breast.
And Manto's stories.
Well, Hassan Manto, yes. His characters famously, as Jalal puts it, resoundingly defy the straitjacketing of religious categories. They show how personal relationships, friendships, love often transcended these rigid religious divides, even amidst the absolute horror.
So identity on the ground was just far more complex than the political labels allowed for.
Far more complex, far more human.
It's hard to even grasp the scale of that tragedy, the human cost.
It really is. Jalal uses this devastating phrase describing how this gift of independence in 1947 came like a shroud of death for the vulnerable, weak, and infirm.
And particularly affecting certain groups.
Disproportionately affecting women, especially those from lower social classes, who bore the brunt of the horrific carnage. And then, even after the lines were drawn, fundamental questions remained unresolved.
Like citizenship.
Exactly. Citizenship rights for the vulnerable, especially for religious minorities. Think of the Ahmadi community in Pakistan, for instance. These issues were largely kicked down the road. The new nation states, Pakistan and India, while trying to define themselves,
Struggled to escape the past.
they struggled to shed the colonial logic, as Jalal terms it, that had blurred the lines between public and private, secular and religious. This often led to new forms of exclusion, new problems.
So even with independence, those colonial categories, that way of thinking, still held immense power, still shaped lives.
They absolutely did. And this deep dive, reading Jalal, really reminds you that identity as a lived cultural experience is just so much richer, so much more complex than simple religious distinctions or political labels can ever capture. The sheer anguish of partition underscores, as Jalal writes, the masterly deception that had turned the dream of independence into one of brutal separation. It left countless individuals grappling with this profound sense of loneliness, confusion, betrayal. It's a powerful, painful lesson.
It really is. This whole journey reveals how that intricate dance, between individual identity and collective belonging, it can lead to such profound cultural richness, but also to just devastating conflict.
Yeah.
The story of self and sovereignty in South Asian Islam is this powerful reminder that communalism is often just a mask, isn't it? A mask for complex, shifting interests, political, economic, social, and those lines we draw between faith, culture, politics. They're rarely as clear or as fixed as they seem.
Absolutely. Which leaves us with a lingering thought, perhaps. What might happen? What could change if we as individuals, as societies, really made a conscious effort to understand and respect the myriad textures of identity, all those complex layers, instead of letting broad, simple categories dictate how we see each other, how we act? It's a question that certainly echoes long after 1947.